Okay guys, so we're going to start a new chapter today and it's called trigonometry. Now trigonometry in your course only deals with right angle triangles. Okay, so what is a right angle triangle? So it is a triangle in which it would have a right angle. So that angle here is a right angle. That's the symbol for a right angle, and that is 90 degrees. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to work with the theorem of Pythagoras. Now you would use this to find missing side lengths in a right angle triangle, okay? So you can't use Pythagoras theorem to find an angles, it's only for the lengths of sides. So the theorem states that the square and the hypotenuse of a right angle triangle is equal to the sum of the squares on the other two sides. So the first thing that we always have to start off with is the square and the hypotenuse. So what is the hypotenuse? Now the hypotenuse is a side of a triangle. It's the longest side, but it's easily identified because it's the one opposite the right angle. So you find your right angle and the side directly opposite that is called your hypotenuse. And you must always start with the hypotenuse. So like if you're looking at this example here, we don't have numbers, we just have letters. So the hypotenuse you have to identify first is the one opposite the right angle, which is the A. So the theorem states that the square and the hypotenuse, so you square it, is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides. So the two sides here was B and C, and we square it, and sum means add. So the theorem of Pythagoras is A squared is equal to B squared plus C squared. Okay, and that A is what you must always start off with, and that A represents the hypotenuse. And you'd recognize the hypotenuse because it's always opposite the right angle. So putting that into practice then, so we have a right angle triangle here with sides x, 6 and 8. So theorem of Pythagoras states that the square and the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides. So we must identify and start off with the hypotenuse first. So remember, the hypotenuse is the longest side and it's the one opposite the right angle triangle. So that's the first thing at the start that I want you to always do, to identify the hypotenuse. So instead of writing hypotenuse, we'll just use short HYP. So then we go with the theorem, which states that the square and the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides. So that would give me, in this example, x squared is equal to 6 squared plus 8 squared. Working out that then, that would give me x squared is equal to 6 squared is 36 plus 8 squared is 64. Adding those two together, x squared would give me 100. Okay, so you're left here now with x squared, but I want to find x. So remember, to get rid of a square, we do the opposite. So we have to get the square root of it. So then x is equal to the square root of 100. So x works out to be 10. So example 2 then, so we have a right angle triangle with sides x, 35 and 12. So the first thing that we have to do is we always have to identify the hypotenuse. So remember, the hypotenuse is directly opposite the right angle triangle. So in this triangle, x is our hypotenuse. So again, always identify that guy, because we must always start with the hypotenuse. So we start with the hypotenuse, and then we'll do the theorem. So the theorem states that the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares on the other two sides. So working that out then, x squared is equal to 12 squared is 144, and 35 squared will give me 1,225. Adding those two together, I get 1,369. Again, I'm left with x squared. I need to get rid of the square, so I get the square root. So that will give me x is equal to the square root of 1369. So x works out to be 37. Okay, so our third example then is finding x again. So x is a length of a side in a right angle triangle, so we can use Pythagoras theorem. So for Pythagoras theorem to work, the first thing that we always have to start off with the hypotenuse, so we must identify the hypotenuse. So here is your right angle triangle, and we know that the side directly opposite is called the hypotenuse. So in this case, our hypotenuse is 12, okay? So don't always expect the hypotenuse to be x. So using the theorem of Pythagoras, which states that the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares on the other two sides, I'm going to get the equation 12 squared is equal to x squared plus 9 squared. So the x squared is on the right hand side. Now we tend to always have x on the left hand side dealing with algebra, but if I bring it over here it becomes a minus and then I have to change it back again, so just messing around with signs. So it's easier to leave the x squared on the right hand side. That means I must get rid of the plus 9 squared. So remember, to get rid of one operation in maths, you have to do the opposite. So that plus becomes minus. And what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So then that will leave me then with 12 squared minus 9 squared is equal to x squared. So 12 squared is 144 minus 81 is equal to x squared. 144 minus 81 will give me 63 is equal to x squared. We want x on its own, so we get the square root of 63. Okay, so the square root of 63, I can break it down. It does not break down to, it's not a perfect square, but it breaks down to a decimal. So that would work out to be 7.94. So x is equal to 7.94, rounding it off to 2 decimal places. Now, if you left it at the square root of 63, you will get full marks. And if they ask you to give your answer in third form, then you leave it with the square root of 63. Okay, so sometimes they will tell you to leave it in third form or to leave it into decimal place. Okay, so sometimes then they'll give you an example using real life problems. Okay, so here now we have a tree. So it says a vertical tree is 16 meters tall, casts a shadow that is 14 meters in length. What is the distance from the top of the tree to the tip of the shadow, represented by the line marked L? Okay, so here we have our tree, here we have our shadow, and we always look for our right angle triangle, because when we're dealing with trigonometry, we just have to deal with right angle triangles. So I always say ignore the drawings and just draw your own right angle triangle without them. And then put in the information that you know. So you know here is your right angle triangle. This would be 14 and this would be 16. So a right angle triangle is always where a vertical line and a horizontal line would meet. Okay, so that's why I know that the right angle triangle is here, and we're looking for L. So we're just back then to what we've been dealing before with a right angle triangle. So like always, we have to identify the hypotenuse. So the hypotenuse here is L, and then using Pythagoras theorem, which states that the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides. So just working that out, L squared is equal to 16 squared is 256 plus 14 squared is 196. Adding those two together will give me L squared is equal to 452. L is equal to the square root of 452. So L works out to be 21.26. Okay, so again, always make sure that you double check your answer. So we know that L is the hypotenuse, which is the longest side. So one side was 16, the other side was 14. So that had to be greater than 16, which it is 21.26. So just always be kind of aware of everything related to the hypotenuse. And then in that one then, I just realised then that they always read every part of the question. It says give your answer to the nearest metre. So we had 21.26. So then my L here will give me, my final answer would be 21 metres, giving it to the nearest metre. Okay, so this would be the last problem that we're going to do. So it's another real life problem. So it says the size of the television screen is the length of its diagonal. So that's how we measure TVs. It's by the length of its diagonal. The size of this television screen is 80 centimeters. If the height of the screen is 42 centimeters, so that's the height, 42. Find the width of the screen in centimeters correct to the nearest whole number. Okay, so the width then is that what we're looking for. So again, I always say ignore the drawing itself. Always with trigonometry, we must try and find the right angle triangle because that's the only shape that we deal with. So we'll just draw our right angle triangle. So here will be my right angle triangle. Put in my right angle. So this, they taught me the height was 42. The diagonal is 80 and we're looking for the width, so we can just label that x. So we're going to use Pythagoras Theorem. So with Pythagoras Theorem, again, we have a right angle triangle, but Pythagoras Theorem always starts off with the hypotenuse. So you identify your right angle triangle, so and then the side directly opposite the right angle is the hypotenuse. So in this case, then our hypotenuse is 80. So you should be quite familiar now with that. So you always start off with the hypotenuse. So that would give me then 80 squared. So the square and the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares on the other two sides. Getting x on its own then, that would give me 80 squared minus 42 squared is equal to x squared. Working out that 80 squared is 6,400. Minus 42 squared, which would work out to be 1,764, is equal to x squared. X squared is equal to 4,636. So x is equal to the square root of 4,636. And it says give your answer to the nearest centimetre, or the nearest whole number. So x works out to be 68 centimetres. So 68 centimetres.